Hi. This is going to be our second lesson on change, and here's just a little recap of the key points from last lesson. There were these different major causes of change. There's some that are rapid change, some that are gradual change, some come from internal causes, some come from external causes, and introduction to new technology can be both, depending on what it is. If you haven't looked at last lesson, then I suggest you do that now because I go into a lot more detail about all these different things. But we're going to have a look this lesson about implementing change. So, just how to do it, advantages, disadvantages, doing it certain ways, and certain problems, obstacles which you've got to consider along the way. Okay, so hopefully by the end of this, you should know the answers to these questions. So this is the points I hope to cover. So which different methods can a business use to implement change? What are some advantages and disadvantages with these methods? From whom might you get resistance when you're trying to implement change? What reasons might they give for resistance? What 3 steps do you need to take to successfully implement change? Which different ways can you evaluate if change has been successful? So that's everything there. There's different ways you can do it, advantages, disadvantages, and then resistance, and reasons for resistance. Okay, so a successful way of doing it, and then just evaluate, check, have we done it successfully? How can you check that? Okay, so normally at this point, I would get people to have little discussions about these different questions and give their ideas. But the situation we're in, we just got to go sort of straight into explaining them. But at any point during this lesson, if you want to think about anything, I might not give you a lot of time, but you can just pause the video and think about something and resume it. Okay, so let's first of all talk about different methods you can use to implement change. I'm going to talk very briefly about these. I'm not going to read them to you. What I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you a couple of key points, then I'm going to tell you to pause the video and have a read of them afterwards. But we've got stories for methods of implementing change. It's important to know these sorts of things. Everything in the notes which has got somebody's name and a number by it can be asked in the exam, and they're generally your lower level easy marks. If they ask what are the 4 stories for methods of implementing change, you could get 4 easy marks just for listing these. If they ask you to explain something, you could get some lower level analysis marks, but still a lot of knowledge marks just for knowing them. If you don't know them, you can't get any of those marks. Okay, so that's something when you go through your notes in general you want to focus on, is just making sure that you know all these different facts and figures. Okay, there's not a huge amount of notes, so it's important you know them well. So first method is negotiated total package. So that is when you've got management, workers, trade unions, everybody, and they have a series of meetings and they discuss how things are going to change. There's this new legislation, there's a change in the labour market, there's a change in technology, whatever it is. There's a series of meetings. This is how we want to change things going forwards, discuss every single point, and then once everybody's agreed, change. Obviously, it's very good in the fact that because you've discussed it and had consultations and everyone's agreed, everyone understands what's going on, they feel invested in it, and they feel that they know what's going on and it's what they wanted. But the difficulty is going to be that it's time consuming, it's expensive to hold those meetings, to get everybody there to discuss things, and it's also difficult to get everybody to agree, because what's agreed by some might not be by others, because it's got different sort of favors. Okay, so that's number 1. Number 2 is negotiated piecemeal incentives. So that is basically when you just have little changes. So, okay, we're not going to change everything all at the same time. We're just going to change this one aspect of things. So we'll have meetings, discussions. We'll change this aspect of how things work. And then once everyone's agreed, we'll sort of change that. But there's some downsides to that where if you're only changing things one part at a time, there's no sort of overall change. So perhaps all the different systems don't line up. Perhaps because it didn't involve certain groups of workers, they weren't consulted, and then things are changing around them. And even if it doesn't affect them directly, it can seem a little bit odd that things are changing without them knowing, and perhaps a little bit scary. And it's got the advantage of being less time consuming and less expensive than negotiating a total package. And also, you're going to find if there's a smaller focus that you are going to get to an agreement more often than with a total negotiated package. So it's got advantages and disadvantages. Then we go into number 3, which is imposed piecemeal incentives. So that is when you've got managers and they decide, okay, we're going to change this aspect of how things works. And the managers will have a meeting and consult, and perhaps they will ask sort of for feedback on their ideas, but they're not asking you to get involved as a worker and coming up with the ideas yourself. And so it's, as it says there, it's imposed. You are just told this is how things are going to be. And it's quicker, it's easier, and the managers who have got the main business aims in mind can perhaps come up with a suitable idea to help with the overall business plan, and hit the objectives. But you've got to realize that people don't like just being told this is how things are. They feel unvalued, perhaps unmotivated, perhaps because they weren't involved in the negotiations. They don't really understand what they're doing or why. And what was discussed in the meeting might have explained exactly why something was being done. But if you weren't involved in the meetings, perhaps you cut some corner. It seems very an obvious corner for you to cut, but it's very important that you shouldn't have cut that corner because of some reason you weren't aware of. And it's not as good as for worker motivation, but it's perhaps more cost effective and a little bit better for the overall objectives of the business. And the last one we got is imposed total package, and that is when all your managers and they can have meetings just like the imposed piecemeal incentives, but they're coming up with a new plan for everything. They are talking through how everything is going to change, and the first, as a worker, you'd hear of it would be when absolutely everything has changed. So if you put yourself in the position of a worker, that's perhaps not very good, because what you thought you knew has now radically changed. Everything's different, and it's all the negative points of imposed piecemeal incentives are going to be amplified because everything has changed, and what you felt like you knew now you don't know. And it's quicker and easier than doing your negotiated packages, but it's not necessarily going to be very good for worker mentality and motivation. But sometimes, if some radical change with the law, perhaps you have to act quickly, and it's definitely the quickest way of changing everything, because you've got fewer people meeting who've got the facts and the business objectives in mind and can talk through it quicker. So I've talked through those. I've perhaps said all the key points. Perhaps there's a few I've missed, and perhaps if you read it, it's going to be a bit more coherent than what I've just said. So pause the video now, have a read of all of these, make sure you understand these different options, and then unpause the video and we'll move on. Okay, so next thing we're going to talk about is worker resistance. So you can think of this from 2 points of view for doing your business studies exam. You can think about it from the point of view of the worker, what the different things they'll be thinking, and you can also think about it from the point of view of the manager, how you can make sure that they do not sort of have these concerns. So once everything's changed in your work, let's imagine that there's a total imposed package. There's sorts of things, even if they weren't mentioned at all, that go through workers' minds. Will I have to work longer hours? There's a lot of new stuff. It's taking me longer time to do it. Perhaps that's just how it's always going to be, or perhaps that's just me getting used to it. Everyone's slower, everyone's disconnected because it's brand new and stuff seems to be going a lot slower. So will you have to work longer hours? Will you be able to carry out the new tasks? They're asking you to do new things, and not everyone's great at everything first time, so that sort of doubt can creep into your mind. Might I be made redundant? So perhaps the introduction of new technology means that what you used to do is now being done by a robot or a computer, and you've been given new tasks, but you just start to think, am I going to be made redundant? Will there be a time where the next update, they don't need me at all? Will I still earn as much? Jobs change, roles and responsibilities change. Will you still earn as much? People think about how much new machinery costs, and will I have as much work? Where does the money for these machines come from? Will I be taking a pay cut? Will I have fewer hours? There's lots of uncertainty. Will I have to move to a new location? So it could be a case of because of certain changes, some people have to change location, some people have to serve multiple locations, and you might be concerned that that's you. It's it's something that is of concern because it does actually happen. Can I still work with my friends? And when everything changes, sort of working teams and dynamics can change. Perhaps you're working alongside completely different people or on your own in completely different task, and you're not doing the same as you used to. So all of these different things are sort of genuine concerns that workers would have when there is change. Now, a lot of these can be avoided with your negotiated packages, but they've got the downsides we've already talked about being difficult to get to. Perhaps they won't have the main business objectives in mind, and they are slower and more expensive to implement. But if you start doing some imposed packages or imposed piecemeal things, then you're going to have these worries. And when you've got sort of somebody who doesn't know everything, the fear of the unknown will create resistance. And resistance can lead to poor performance, poor productivity, poor motivation, and it can cause problems for the business. The other things to consider are supplier resistance and owner resistance. You might have some suppliers who they're a completely separate company, but you've used them for 20 years and you've used them in the exact same way for 20 years. And now when everything's changed, even if you did a completely negotiate package, you're not going to necessarily negotiate with other companies that you work with. And they might be resistant. They might have everything in their business set up so that they can supply you with what you need when you need it. And perhaps you need work. You need supplies at a short deadline. Perhaps you need more, perhaps you need less, perhaps you need different things, and perhaps they can't meet those needs. Perhaps they'll um, struggle to meet those needs. Perhaps they're just, again, they've got the fear of the unknown. They think if you're changing things now, what'll stop you changing things in the future? They used to be just safe, consistent supplies, but now it's changing, and perhaps you'll need to change your suppliers because of your just your production methods changed. You're just doing just-in-time production method, that sort of thing. This is an example of how all the Unit 2 um, information overlaps with this. And there's also owner resistance, which is, again, if you're the owner of the company, you've generally been with it a very long time. There's a new CEO, he's changing things. It might all be for the best, but you're, again, fear of the unknown. You have run this company successfully for 20 years doing it this way, and now somebody's telling you we've got to change. You might be very resistant to that change because you think it might give your company a bad name, bankrupt the company, lower profits, all these different things, take the company in a path that you don't want or you're not sure of. So you've just got to consult all these people and make sure that that this resistance is taken care of. Okay, so that's worker resistance and supplier resistance and owner resistance. So then there's something called Lewin's three-stage change. So again, it's one of those things with a name and a number. It can be asked in the test, what are the 3 stages? What are Lewin's 3 stages? And the stage 1 is unfreezing. So that is realize that you have got to, at the moment, you're frozen in the way you used to do things. You've got to unfreeze and just be prepared to take on something new and not just have the mindset that everything is exactly the same as it was before. Just having that right mentality. Then stage 2 is change or transition. So this is the difficult time where things are actually changing. There's new forms of training, education need to go on. Certain people have new roles. There's going to be people who are not motivated. They don't understand what they're doing. They're trying, but they're not able to do things immediately. And that change and transition period is going to be difficult for everyone. So you've got to perhaps cut workers a bit more slack, not criticize them so much, and just make everything straightforward and crystal clear so that everyone can get through this process as quickly as possible. Just because you have been in a bunch of meetings and you understand it fully doesn't mean that you can just send an email to everybody and they will understand it all fully. And then once that period's over, the third stage is refreezing. So now that you've got this new mindset, you've got these new ways of doing work, just refreeze in them and stick to those and just carry on as normal. And then that's when you'll see that hopefully motivation and productivity go up and efficiency go up, and things will be getting a bit more straightforward. So those are the 3 stages there. I suggest you pause the video now and have a read of it, and I'll talk about the next thing in a moment. Okay, so last thing we're going to talk about today is evaluating change. So you've had whichever method you've chosen for implementing the change, you've done that. Whatever the reason, the cause of change, that was established. You've then implemented the change. You've gone through the 3 stages. You've addressed everybody's concerns and made sure they understand and they're appropriately trained, and you've had that transition period, you've refrozen it, and okay, now, well, has it actually been successful? So things you can check, and again, this could be a sort of a low-level question where they just ask you to list a few things that will help you evaluate whether change has been successful. You might get a more detailed question with a case study where you've got to talk about some of these in more specific. So you might get one In theory, we've got to talk about some of these in more specifics, but the things you can check are delivery times. Are they getting slower? Are they getting quicker? Are they remaining the same? Product defects. If you've got a new production method, if the production method was intended to make fewer defects, has that been the case? If the production method was just meant to be cheaper or more eco-friendly or more efficient, you still don't want product defects to increase. You want to make sure that the machines are sort of calibrated right, or the workers are doing their new thing just as well. So you can check that. Customer satisfaction surveys. So there's a whole load of changes. Just ask your customers, are they still happy with their service? Are they perhaps more happy? Are they just as happy? Market share. So have you still got as much of the market share in your market as you used to? Or has it increased if that was the point of the change? Or has it decreased if things haven't gone well? Sales turnover. So are you selling as much product? Are you losing orders because of this change? Are you unable to fill orders? Are you still getting all those sales that you used to? That could be something to do with, imagine if there's legislation with the sugar tax and you've had to increase the price of something. And does that mean you've not sold as many? Or perhaps because of the sugar tax, you've started selling diet drinks. Has that affected sales? Are you selling the same number of units of drink, or has that changed? And the last thing is profit, the bottom line. So are you making as much profit? Perhaps that was the reason for change. You weren't making enough profit, and hopefully this has increased. Or perhaps the change has been imposed for some other reasons, some legislation or technology or consumer taste or any other sorts of reason for change, but hopefully your bottom line, your profit, has not been affected. Okay, so there's a lot to take in there. Perhaps you'll need to have a look back over the notes. Perhaps you want to have a look through this again, think about your own examples. But again, no task from this other than just sort of consolidating your knowledge, because what you'll find is I can't just give you Unit 4 questions to do, because they're all sort of, you need to know more of the course in order to answer the questions. They're all sort of interwoven together. There is not much questions on one specific topic. Everything's sort of overlapping. Okay, so hopefully that all made sense. If anything didn't, or you want something clarified, just email me or message me and I'll get back to you when I can.